Hi, everybody. Welcome to Midweek in the City, week 2 of our fall season. I'm so glad you're here to join us. We have a panel discussion this evening on the mind-body-spirit connection, really tackling the question, how can I become calm in an anxious world? How can I live calm in an anxious world? We'll be having this panel discussion tonight and I want to go ahead and introduce our panel to you. This is Dr. Ray Wooten. He is a professor of counseling at Texas A&M San Antonio, and he's also a counselor in private practice. He's a mind-body psychotherapist, and we are glad you're with us tonight, Dr. Wooten. Thank you so much for being here. And Blaise Langan, who is a physician at UT Health in physiatry. And we are very glad that you are here this evening with us, Blaise. We also have our friend, Megan Langan, who is our newest, we're still saying that, aren't we? Our newest staff member. She is Associate Minister for Single Adults here at First Baptist Church, San Antonio. And also, back to Blaise here. Blaise is the husband of Megan Langan. And so there's a little nepotism happening up here tonight. But that's okay. That's okay. It's benign nepotism. All right, and Megan, you have something to add to any of this?
Yeah, and after this panel discussion, we're going to jump on Zoom for a live Q&A, and so the link will be posted in the Facebook group. Just jump on that Zoom link, and we'll get a chance to field your questions about what you heard here tonight, and so we're really excited for that as well. So me and Blaise will be on that call, just wanting to hear your thoughts and your questions based on what we've talked about tonight.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Dr. Wooten has class, and so he will not be able to join in on the Q&A, but he will be here in spirit, if not mind and body. So that's the one connection that will remain, I guess. We'll see about that. As you know, Midweek in the City is predicated on the instructions Jesus gave us to ask, seek, and knock. And the universe will yield to our questions. That's how he said reality works, and we like to ask questions here at Midweek in the City. Better questions for better living, we sometimes say. So thank you for joining us, and I hope that you, as you listen to this panel discussion, you can formulate questions of your own for later on. But let's start tonight by defining what we're talking about here. We've said we're going to focus on the mind, body, and spirit connection, and different schools of thought, different religious traditions, and so forth, have differing definitions of mind, body, and spirit. But what is something that is workable or a working definition for you, Dr. Wooten?
In thinking about mind, body, and spirit, and what makes that up from a counseling and psychotherapy perspective, first I want to say for pretty much since its inception, the body didn't exist in counseling and psychotherapy. It's primarily something of the mind and thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
Sure, yeah.
And as of late, due to trauma and neuroscience and so forth, the body, I think, has kind of been reintroduced. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, I don't focus so much on defining specifically what any one thing is. So body and mind, from my perspective, body, mind, and spirit is all one thing. Okay. It's a unified whole. So I would step into it from that perspective. I know that we've created the terms mind and body. We've dichotomized that. And thus what's happened is we privilege thinking and thought, marginalize the body. So often, from a practice perspective, if somebody says, well, why the body? Well, probably the idea would be is it's been objectified. It is seen as object. I want to create the turn so you then begin to see that this living, breathing organism, all of who you are, is present and means something. So I wouldn't say that in our field or me personally that I would go, this is the body, it is made up of a variety of systems, and all the systems are important.
Right.
But we wouldn't look at any one specific thing. So it's body as subject. I mean, that's how I would answer something like that.
So it's not siloed in these separate. It's not a tripartite kind of
No.
division for you. Okay. Anything to add to that, Blaise?
And that kind of struck the nail on the head from your field and also into mine. As being an osteopath, one of the first things that we're taught is that every patient is mind, body, and spirit, and they should be treated as such, and that valid treatment is based on treating all three of those facets. But like you said, dividing up those three terms can be helpful in language every once in a while to further specify what you mean.
For precision and so forth, yeah.
But as far as my treatment goes, those are not things that I see as separate.
Okay.
So when I'm defining those terms, I mean, very analytical about it.
Sure.
The mind would be just the central nervous system. So,
Right.
it's a body system to me. Right. And even though each person specializes in their own particular body system, we have to know each of them intimately because they all connect in very specific and intimate ways.
Yeah. Megan, thoughts?
Yeah, so it sounds like there might be damage done if we think of them as siloed or as separate things. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are we missing if we don't understand that they're interrelated, that they're very much connected to one another?
Yeah, I think from my perspective is kind of the alternative of yours is that we as physicians have tended to prioritize the body and marginalize the mind when and I mean that's how medicine has been built over the past few centuries, is that we had access to the body for physical study, but we didn't really have access to the mind because that was something a little bit more intricate than we had the ability to either dissect or to study or those sorts of things. So we naturally tended towards studying the body, and so that's where most of our treatments were. But now I feel really encouraged because so much of medicine is looking at incorporating the mind into the body and how it affects the body, and especially when it comes to traumatic events or to things we classically call mental illness. We're seeing their effects in the body, and how treating the body can affect the mind, and treating the mind can affect the body because they're so closely related.
Yeah. I like what you were saying is you go with what you have access to, and the body is very present to us, and so I can see how that would have been. Any thoughts to add on that question?
Yeah, what I was thinking was, I likewise would go with what presents itself, but often I realize that people have been conditioned to think about the body as something to endure, or they're not very mindful or even aware that they have a body. Typically we dress the body, we feed the body, but from different philosophies and perspectives, the body is seen as something that's going to let us down. It's not a good thing, it's evil.
That is so true. Yeah, exactly.
It's merely a vessel to hold something. And thus, that's why it doesn't surprise me that then people, in many cases, just don't take care of or envision that my shape, my organismic being, all of who I am is important. Because, I like to think that then what you bring in is some type of perspective, and that perspective is held at the level of the body. And at the level, pretty much our shape creates our perception, and our perception creates our shape.
Okay. Wow. Then in your practice, that brings up another question here. How in practice do you see that interrelationship at work? Somebody not paying attention to the body or thinking it's important, for instance.
Well, again, I think conditioning is a pretty pervasive thing in our life. We're born, and then from that moment, we are conditioned to be somebody. we're in an environment that totally shapes all of who we are. I think as we grow, most of the people that come into my office at some level are wanting to become nobody. They're wanting to dismantle all that's been conditioned.
Yeah.
However, they have cognitive constructs and templates and schemas about what that means.
Okay, I have never heard it put like that before. They're wanting to become nobody. You mean you
Well,
use that language intentionally?
Yeah, right. We spend a lot of our life becoming somebody,
Right, right.
and often that's then not working in some way.
Okay.
You know, people, come see you guys, something's not working.
Yes.
And they've constricted, pretty much their idea of what that is. So I'm hearing the story, and I love the story. I like for people to tell me. But you were asking about the body, but what I know is that any thought, image, or idea anybody has, the body has to constrict or contort itself to hold that belief.
Yes.
And
Okay.
thus, thus what I can then help them is begin to expand. They come in a very constricted place, and for me, I want to help them be able to expand into something new
Yes.
without pushing the river, of course, but
Yeah.
help them gently unfold that.
Right,
Blaise?
and that's the exact same when it comes to my field, is that somebody will come in and they'll be saying, oh, this specific part of my body is hurting or is the problem. But when we try to expand the picture to include even just the rest of the body, not including the mind, most people can't even get to there when they say,
Right.
this is my knee, but I'm talking about your hip, or I'm talking about your back. Much less when I start talking about your mind, they completely shut down, and that's the last thing they want to hear from you, when really the problem isn't just in any one location. It's located throughout the body. The body is not able to hold trauma, whether that be physical or mental or spiritual trauma, in one location. That's not how bodies were set up. They were meant to distribute a load equally.
Because it's a system.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Not a receptacle, I guess.
Correct.
Really.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
That's wonderful.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I love that idea of people coming in to see you and kind of pursuing taking things off and wanting to become nothing. And, because when they layer on so many different kinds of trauma, it's interesting that you said that they want to move through the world without all of that on them. And so to just have that freedom of taking those things off and becoming, nothing, as you said, that's just, and we'll talk about trauma more in a minute, but I just think that's really enlightening. But.
And I want to approach each of your specialties here just for a moment. Blaise, can you tell us a little bit about what your training has shaped you to address in a person? It's not just, going to the doctor for, blood pressure check and, take these pills and, call me in the morning. What is your area of training preparing you to address?
So as a physiatrist, we're mostly seeing the long name for a physiatrist is a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation. So part of physical medicine is obviously going to include pain or injury to specifically the musculoskeletal system, so having to deal with muscles and bones. And that's kind of perceived as our field of expertise. And I love that. That's my favorite. Those are my favorite things to deal with.
Yeah.
But as a medical student, not that long ago, I was trained as an osteopath, which is not an MD, but a DO. And so from day one of osteopathic medical school, they're teaching us that the body, mind, and spirit are interrelated and that good treatment is based on those. But they're also teaching us in something called osteopathic manipulative medicine. So using your hands to treat small areas of muscle, tissue, bone, fascia, whatever that may be, in order to put the body in the right place where it can heal itself. So the belief is not that I'm some savior coming to the body and putting it back in the right place and now it's cured. It's coaxing the body along into a place where it can naturally heal itself. So bring the body to a neutral, because like Megan was saying, this just made me think of it, is that the body is meant to absorb trauma and meant to absorb events and move on from those. So it's not meant for those events to bounce off. It's meant to take those, adapt, and go forth new.
Yeah.
And so that's what we want to do with osteopathic medicine and with physical medicine, is that we believe that pain is something that you can touch with your hands and move in the right direction, in addition to using medications and procedures and the like.
Right. Okay. That is so fascinating. And I was reading a little bit about physical medicine a few days ago, and and I'd never, until I met you, I never even paid attention to that label, physical medicine. But it was talking about a real holistic view of the person, even a social context, a person in social context too, not just an isolated individual.
Absolutely. So you have to take into consideration what the person's biopsychosocial factors are coming into that room with them. So it's not just saying, okay, where's your pain? When did you get hurt? It's also saying, what else is going on in your life? What else is affecting this situation or has affected this situation in the past? And then as a Christian coming into that room, I'm also taking into consideration what spiritually are people going through. And so that's a tricky thing to deal with in the modern medical world, where that's not generally an acceptable question. So generally the way I ask it to each and every one of my patients is there anything going on spiritually that you would like for me to address while I'm taking care of you?
Yeah.
And that allows them to say, no, or actually there is something that I would like for you to address, and that gives me the opportunity to be a truer physician in my eyes to them.
I love how that is so patient-centric there. Much in the same way, I guess, that counseling is client-centric, if you will. What is body-centered psychotherapy, Dr. Wooten?
Body-centered psychotherapy, I guess, from a generic perspective, would just be that from a clinical perspective, we would start bottom up.
Okay.
We would start in the body, nervous system, and privilege that. Traditionally, if you look at counseling and psychotherapy, it's a top-down perspective. It's language and meaning and words. And all that is great because we know that it's all intertwined and connected.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's been basically separated for 100 years or so. Yeah. When you start looking at psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapy, it's about memories and reconstruction and interpretation.
And something just occurred to me as you were saying that. Is this the top-down approach? Would this be something like we've all heard of, somebody treating hysteria by probing into the memories and mind and so forth, and finally get to why this person is experiencing blindness or something?
Attempting to get to whatever that conversion is.
Right.
Or much like cognitive therapy, it's going to be listening to your thoughts and beliefs and tying that, and there's some education towards what's erroneous or not.
Sure.
Again, very top. And so basically it cuts off here.
Okay, yeah.
So it's, pretty much what's in your head and what meaning and reflection you make. So from a body place, what that would look like is that in a conversation, there's still going to be words and eye contact and nervous system and everything engaged. However, what I know and what we know is that there's going to be a physical correlate to whatever you're talking about. And we also know from a body-centered place is that anytime we work with the body, it's going to be regressive. Yeah. So it's going to take us back to the source. And what that will look like is, the beginning of it would look like is a lot of what awareness might look like. It's you're talking about this, and I can see that you're holding your breath, or you're tightening your jaw, and we would bring some awareness to those things, and then probably have you gently lean into, your jaw tension, constriction, holding, and then just more information comes. So basically, I'm helping you learn to choose sensation, because sensation is the first language of the body from a body-centered perspective.
Okay.
learn, get into sensation, because sensations are different from feelings and thoughts.
Sure.
So it's another language. And following that, listening, befriending what comes. So in another way, the body doesn't lie. The nervous system can't lie. It doesn't have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
Words and thoughts and memories and reflections can be very skewed. So we're going for the truth that's
Okay.
here
I
because
see.
it is here.
I see.
Yeah.
And then that's going to take...
It's like a tree ring or something that a
Yeah.
climate scientist would look at. Oh, something happened here.
Right. So we want to get away from talking about stuff all the time to the experience.
Okay.
Yeah. So is that method used when you're treating clients with things like body dysmorphia or body image related issues and those things, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Body dysmorphia, body image, a
Yeah.
lot of trauma work, pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Because again, there's always going to be the correlate. And typically there's more information being held than what your consciousness is going to allow you to speak.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned, following up on that question, you mentioned earlier the body as object. We tend to treat it that way. Does this fuel some of the objectification of persons that we find in societies or in our society sometimes? Objectification of bodies and the emphasis on body image having to live up to certain benchmarks.
yeah, we see the body as object, as other, which often creates a sense of hatred towards, because it doesn't look like certain things. So a lot of perpetuation of illusion is created, and I'm supposed to look this way, feel this way, respond this way, and so
Yeah.
forth. And when I can't, and I'm involved in hell, which I call that comparison,
Yeah.
if I'm comparing myself to another, then that's going to create a lot of hatred, self-hatred.
Yeah.
And that's not just something that happens, when we're talking about, I feel like body image is a lot of times constrained to how we feel, but that's also something when it comes to medical conditions as well. Like, I just had to tell a patient this week, you're not going to feel 20 again when you're 50, or
Right,
you're not
right.
going to, you're not going to be able to do the things that you were before. And so I see that hatred come up in people for their own body as it, quote, fails them, versus how we're supposed to think about our bodies as something that's constantly adapting and constantly evolving to meet the pressures that are put on it.
And I think that is so important to speak of it in that manner, that a hatred, to address that. I don't think that's too strong of a word, because we say, I am angry at my body for not doing what I demand of it. Yeah.
And that
it's-
only causes more dysfunction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and often the anger, the hatred may be secondary, but just right under that surface is shame, guilt, doubt, fear
Yeah.
of my body's not holding up, or my body is sick.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So a lot
And
of
there's
anger.
a short step to then what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
We go there, I think.
Yeah.
And we feel inferior, and
Yeah.
this kind of conversation about this holistic person, mind, body, spirit, and all of that interwoven, it seems not to have occupied too high a place in Western wellness or Western medicine. I don't know if that's even right. That's kind of what it seems like to me. I remember, it seems like I remember people talking about holistic medicine, or holistic treatments as some fringe, kind of specialty or something. Anything to say about that, Blaise?
I'm fairly encouraged because I feel like that's coming out of the shadows. So that's not just something that's taught at osteopathic schools anymore. That's something that's taught at, a DO would be an osteopath, an MD would be an allopath. It's also taught at allopathic schools.
Okay.
And so that's not something that anybody has a specific hold on anymore. I think that's a direction we're going as, not just as specific specialties, but as a field. We're moving towards more holistic medicine.
Okay, that's good to hear.
But the barrier to that is the way our system is set up right now. We're centered around diagnoses.
Give me a pill,
Right.
or
And-
whatever. Do a surgery.
And of course, that makes so much sense, because if A plus B and C gives me results DEF, and we can codify DEF as diabetes or as cancer or as whatever it might be, and then we know about how much time and effort and skill it's going to take to treat diabetes or cancer or whatever, and so then we can pay you your money and send you on your way. But unfortunately, people aren't easily placed into boxes, and people's bodies and minds are interrelated in such intricate ways that one person's lupus looks very different from another person's lupus. And so but the only way to study them so far has been to treat them all the same, so we can expect similar results, even though that's not what ends up happening.
That's very interesting. So there's even a thought about tailoring the way you treat a person, even if it's the same diagnosis,
Right.
In the medical field. And by the way, I just want to say, when I talk about just take a pill, I am not denigrating medicine. I want to be quick to say that, everybody. I was just saying, take a pill. The mindset exists. I want to take a pill instead of, or so that I won't have to address any other component of me. And that's all I was saying there.
And holistic medicine is saying that the treatment is not just going to be, manipulative medicine or
Yes.
massage or whatever it is, not just treating that, but we're not just going to treat the physical, we're also going to treat the chemical with medication, we're also going to treat the anatomic with surgery or other certain interventions, and we're going to treat the mental with what you do. And so we're combining our forces in ways that we were trained to do.
Sure.
And although I acknowledge the mind in my practice, I know my deficiencies in treating it.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to work together as professionals to treat a whole person. No one person can treat a whole person. It takes a team to do that.
Sure. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think it takes time for the academy and medical schools to catch up with basically what people are asking for. I've been around a while, and I've seen, decade after decade, new things being introduced to the field. I mean, who would have thought, in my training 30-some years ago, that we'd be doing yoga, that we'd be focusing on breath, there's something called mindfulness. Those were things that I was interested in. And so in my doc program and after, those things weren't deemed as important. They seemed as fringe.
Yeah.
Now it's what we do, or at least it's available.
Sure.
And even some medical insurances are paying for those opportunities now.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah.
And yet still, we still have assessment, diagnosis, give it a number, and kind of put it back on track or in the box.
Right.
Get so many sessions and be done. But I'm encouraged because I'm seeing more holism
Good.
in things. So I think it's a good movement.
Well, and so much
Fantastic.
of what we're talking about and things like in your profession, like PTSD is still a new idea or a new, so many of these mental health issues have just not been studied for very long. And so can really both of you touch on and you've talked about this a little bit, how you've seen kind of the evolution of our understanding of the body and mind, or how has this evolved in your disciplines? Yeah.
I mean, I think we've come a long way from good and bad humors causing all physical ailments and mental ailments. I think, several hundred years ago, the idea was that mind, body, and spirit were all so interconnected that you couldn't take them take them apart, and so to treat one was to treat them all, and that sounds really good, but the way that we were doing it was pretty awful. We were doing bloodletting for, different mental illnesses, which we know now is not the way to do things.
Right.
And as we've moved away from that, as far as physicians have gone, we've tended more towards the body and forgotten the mind and the spirit. But then now we're starting to come back around. But I think we're coming back to that connectedness with a better sense of how to do research and how to treat.
That's kind of like an enlightenment thing. The more we began to be, empirical science and so forth began to take shape, we really focused on a materialistic view, I think, of the universe, and there are some people today who would say the mind is simply the consciousness arises from these neurons, and we are only this collection of chemicals. But you were talking about the good and bad humors. I remember seeing those old diagrams, of the good humors or bad humors flowing through the body or something. I think I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, black bile, phlegm.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So bring back the good old days. Bring on the leeches. No, you touched on the history of how that has progressed, even in your career.
Yeah, in my career. As a field, I would say go back to a couple of decades prior to Freud. There was a guy by the name of Pierre Genet, who a lot of the literature is going back to now in terms of trauma and regulation in the body. So the body has always, in counseling and psychotherapy, had a thread. It really gained momentum post-Freud with a guy by the name of Wilhelm Reich, who really liked the body and looked at it. But of course, there's a whole history around him being imprisoned by the FDA for creating the organ box, saying it could heal everything. But that's another story. So the body,
I've not heard that.
The body has always been around, and there's been kind of a subterranean thread of that. And again, I mentioned it earlier, with the advent of all the new neuroimaging and being able to connect that to brain and then trauma, the body has had a new revolution in counseling and psychotherapy. So now you've got books, as you mentioned, The Body Keeps the Score and those types of things. So you have lots of different body-centered psychotherapies that do a lot of very similar things just from different perspectives.
Yeah.
But at some level, they're still a little fringy.
Yeah. I get the feeling sometimes that still has that vibe a little bit, or reputation. Were you going to say something, Blaise?
Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder if the inventor of the fMRI really knew that they were going to revolutionize, most of modern medicine. So an MRI that also is able to look at how active certain tissues are, especially in the brain, when a patient is shown pictures or read a story or those sorts of things. And so
that's the fMRI as opposed to just the MRI.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Amazing. Okay, I want to touch on something here that may be a little bit esoteric for some, but can you help us understand polyvagal theory in 25 words or less? No, I'm kidding.
I did have to Google it before we started this conversation.
Polyvagal theory.
And Blaise can probably help me here. As my understanding, polyvagal is basically a little more differentiated model of the central nervous system.
Okay.
I think like most of us here were probably raised pretty early that there was some, our central nervous system was sympathetic and parasympathetic, that it was kind of an antagonistic way of being. It's kind of like a seesaw. If I'm not this, then I'm that. And a couple of decades ago, a guy by the name of Stephen Porges kind of discovered a different branch of the vagus nerve that, starts at the base of the brain and innervates the body, and basically saw that instead of just sympathetic, fight or flight, and parasympathetic, restore and digest, that there is the ventral vagal part of this that innervates our face, our heart, and our lungs. So basically, what we're always doing from a central nervous perspective and from this model is orienting, scanning, and attending to what's happening inside, outside, between, in spirit, and socially engaging in a way that keeps things cool, so to speak, while attending to if there's a threat or not. So instead of us always being in a particular charge or of mobility or immobility, when danger or threat presents itself, we first attend to by using our social skills. That's 50
Okay.
words.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
more
All
than
right.
I
Blaise, I mean, anything to add to that?
It's not something that I'm super familiar with, but that's another fairly osteopathic field, is looking at balancing the autonomic nervous system. So generally we view this nervous system as voluntary and involuntary, or in that involuntary part of our nervous system, we divide further into that sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight versus rest and digest. And so osteopaths generally focus on balancing those two, fight or flight versus rest and digest, not saying, oh, we need to turn one on and one off, or both of them off, or both of them on. It's about balancing those two things. And so from study of cadavers and from live body studies, we know that those fibers emerge from different parts of the spine and different parts of the brain. And so there are specific levels of neurons coming off of the spine that correlate to each organ and innervate each organ from each of those perspectives. And so by balancing the activity or the sensation around those nerves, we can sort of tone down or tune up that balancing system.
Okay, why would we not pay careful and tender attention to this body? I mean, when I hear you describing it, it is just so wondrous. And how could we leave it out of our self-care? I mean, how could we afford to do that? I think it's to our detriment that we leave it out of our self-care.
When every single part of our body is connected, not only to the ones around it, but specifically to neurons that are going to each and every single part of it, and different kinds and all sorts of things. So when, how can we not say that, oh, this stomach problem that I'm having isn't connected to the depression or anxiety that I'm feeling right now, when there's a literal, physical, direct connection between the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
Yeah, and that understanding of the body has just taken so many turns, when we look at communities of faith. And so we know that religion has a huge influence of our understanding of the body. But how could the Christian doctrine of the incarnation, or, the things that we believe as Christians, influence the way we view the body or understand the body?
I mean, it's so important to study church history. So I'll get there. But one of the earliest Christian heresies is called Gnosticism, which is viewing the body as bad and the spirit as good. And that's one of the earliest things struck down by organized Christianity. But yet I find that we're returning to that over and over and over again, when really the story of Christ and the incarnation is a direct testament against that. So I think foundational principles to Christianity are that Jesus was perfect in every way, and that he was fully God and fully man. I don't think there are many Christians that would debate the validity of those two and still call themselves a Christian, but if we believe those two, that means Christ's body was perfect. And so that the body isn't something that's bad or to be rid of. It's something to be embraced and to be sanctified. I mean, when we think about the future after Christ has returned, there's a new heaven and a new earth. It's not like we all go to heaven and live there forever. The physical is still something that's here, but it's been redeemed.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that thread a little bit, because if something says the body is important, we ought to pay attention to that. And I think sometimes we sort of mystify or fairy tale-ize certain aspects of Christian doctrine, for instance, rather than say, what does this say to us about living as a human being with my feet on the ground, and I'm capable of sweating and breathing, and Jesus, the Christian doctrine says, God became flesh, and it did not say he rejected that, but he willingly did that, and it says that he was flesh after all was said and done, too. I mean, the body came out of the grave. It's not like, oh, that's over. It came out of the grave, and one of my favorite passages of Scripture is after Jesus' resurrection, he comes into the room, one of his post-resurrection experiences. He comes into the room with his disciples, and he clearly has these abilities to pass through locked doors, and he understood matter in a way that he was able to do that, to phase with it. But he said, peace be with you. And we would all say, okay, well, that's a pretty religious thing to say. And we put that on stained glass windows. But right after he said that, and I've never seen this on a stained glass window, is, do you have anything to eat? I mean, I just think that is so, I'm so glad that's in the Bible, because what it says is, this body is important. And they gave him a piece of broiled fish. I mean, we have the menu there. He gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it in their presence. And he says, touch me. I have flesh and bones. I'm not a ghost. So it seems that there is value in the body, but or it seems like our own faith teaches us that there's value in the body, and yet we still swim in a culture that often, a society that says this is an object. Anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, I think that's the point, that we're still overcoming the idea that, or it's hard to imagine that we are a living organism, that there's a consciousness here.
Oh, yeah.
And so often I use the term soma or somatic, which points to a living entity versus body, because often body's seen as something out there. But if I think of myself as soma, it's living, it organizes, there's a consciousness. My body is consciousness on many different levels. I think that would then help kind of elevate who I am versus denigrate parts of me. So at some level, it's about accepting all of who I am.
Yes.
But as long as there's parts of me that are going to be critical or so forth, then there's going to be division.
Right.
And so much of our language is just difficult when we're talking about the body, in the faith-based context. And we were talking about this morning, the words that we use that are sometimes big, using the word flesh to describe sin and to describe physical bodies. There's just problems that we run into with that.
Our English language fails us there because there is a nuance in the Scripture that flesh could also meant the world system, and that really doesn't come through in sort of a translated context there.
Yeah, you can see some of that in the work of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who is a phenomenologist that focused on the body. He uses the word flesh in a very similar.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I need to check that.
Yeah.
Afterwards, let me have that name again. I want to check that out. The body caring for the body can also be a spiritual practice. And picking up on this idea of soma, that has a spiritual overtone to it, really. Does it not? It would seem to have that to it. And so caring is more than just, doing your jumping jacks. I mean, it's caring for all of you, recognizing that you have a body too, I think.
Yeah. Do you guys have thoughts on, how can we incorporate our physical self-care into spiritual practice or into pursuing wellness and those things?
I think it's incorporated whether you want it to be or not. I think our body, our mind, and our spirit are so interconnected that when we do physical wellness, we are practicing mental and spiritual wellness. When we're doing mental wellness, and spiritual wellness, we're doing the other three. And so the problem is that we tend to focus on one of those more than another. And so, but I think it's beautiful the way that we were designed so that, when I feel like I'm running into a mental roadblock, there are other avenues from which I can attack that problem. So maybe I'm running into a mental roadblock because my body isn't on the same page. Maybe I need to take care of my body in a new way in order to break through that mental roadblock, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think that with the body, I think it hasn't been too long since pastors were at greatest risk, or an elevated risk of heart disease and that kind of bodily demise because, we overate or, didn't exercise or didn't pay attention. And again, that's part of that treating it as a thing rather than caring for your whole self.
Yeah, and there's so many ministers buy into that idea of the physical world doesn't matter.
Right.
My body
That's right.
doesn't matter.
That's
so
right.
I'll just throw all of my attention onto the spiritual and caring for my congregation, but we're missing it.
It's kind of a distortion of Plato.
Yeah.
We all become focused on the form, or away from the forms and towards the ideals.
Yeah.
Meditation is that involves bodily processes, does it not, Dr. Wooten?
Yeah, what I was thinking when you guys were chatting, spiritual practice is physical.
That's good.
I mean, and then
That's
you
really
and then
good.
you went to meditation. I mean, think about how you hold yourself in worship, how you hold yourself with a mudra or a hand position or the way you stand.
Yes.
So something I've been interested in is how to embody faith. Because often I see people, thinking and believing, which is great, but I think that you can also know. You can have that experience in my body.
Yes.
So I'm embodying the experience and knowledge of all of who I am. And often what that looks like, I do some groups. I help people become in touch with sensation and moving their bodies, and again, coming from something constricted to a little more expanded. So, it's tightening and loosening and tightening and loosening, and, being able to open. We talk about what opening our hearts to. We talk about opening our minds to. However, if I'm constricted and holding and tight, where is there a place for spirit if we want to think of it that way?
Yes.
I think there's a very valid reason why in so many places in Scripture, and this is continued throughout Christianity, is that raising one's hands in worship or lying prostrate on the ground is...
Or the laying on of hands.
Or the
there's so
laying
many
on of
things.
hands,
Yeah,
or all
right.
those things are incorporated because that's part of our design.
Right.
Yeah.
An experiment I do sometimes in a group is, tell me what you know to be true about God, and, kind of go around and tell me what you know, tell me what you know. Now, with all that you know, you've got it written down. Now, for the next 5 minutes, act as if you truly believe that, embody that.
Okay, that is amazing. That's really great.
So I have people stand up and walk around, and I'm feeling goosebumps here, and you know it. It's not a thought.
That's just...
I know it all the way down to my mitochondria. That
Wow.
this is the truth, and the truth resides in me.
Yeah.
I am made in the image and likeness.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm going to take all that on.
Yeah.
The goosebumps are contagious, actually. Really, feeling those. Okay, then, and we don't have a lot of time here left. This is making me sad. My sad part is coming out now because we're going to have to wrap this up in a minute. But how, just from a practical standpoint, how can a person begin to practice? This is really a two-part thing here, and Megan, jump in whenever you want, if you want, but how can a person begin to practice an awareness of that whole self that empowers that person to address anxiety or distress or pain or fear? In other words, how can we live on a daily basis more holistically? And there's a follow-up to that too. So
I would say this conscious breath and this conscious breath and this one. I would say just bring in awareness to this in-breath and to this out-breath. I think that begins. I think then things have to be titrated, because if you figure if we've been living an anxious life, the reality that I'm going to drop it today is
that's
low.
a good point. Yeah.
And, however, there's an expectation in magazines and things, get rid of your anxiety in 12 hours.
Mindfulness in half an hour.
Right.
Well,
What happens, that brings up lots of fear, because, again, I'm now introducing new aspects of myself that may have been hidden or frozen or unconscious. So I'm saying titrate, take it on easy, and while you're taking conscious breaths, then make eye contact with somebody or connect with a friend or make a phone call. Again, we want to get in touch with that kind of ventral vagal part of what we were talking earlier, which is social engagement.
Yeah.
So make a call, visit with somebody.
While you are conscious of your breathing.
Right, which is called co-regulation, because the body is relational. I mean, we were created in relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in Western culture, you want to self-soothe, you want to self-regulate. I think that creates more anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and that's so important that you touched on the need for patience with yourself as we're doing this work and this inner work, because so much of this, we bring up things that we didn't know were there, new anxieties or trauma and those things. And so the patience that we need to have with ourselves in that process is so important. So
Right.
Yeah.
Because the opposite of that is fear. We, like you said, we get frozen with fear because we're not doing it right, or we think we have to.
Or if I even drop my weight a little, that may be triggering to a degree. So that's where this. If I'm letting my weight down after holding myself up forever, then that can create some more anxiety.
So relaxation itself?
It can. So that's why I'm saying go slow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Go slow. Take your time. Be patient with yourself. Be loving to yourself.
Okay.
Eat a bowl of ice cream after you breathe.
That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah. Titrate the ice cream. How can a person then, and this is really the follow-up, how can a person begin to practice such an awareness of his or her whole being in such a way that that person is empowered then to welcome and accept others? I mean, it's not just ourselves that are in this life. It's other people. And to be welcomed and accepted, I'm beginning to catch on that that's one of the rarest things that we find in our world, to be welcomed and accepted. I have a whole host of issues in myself that that result from a fear that I will not be welcomed and accepted. So how can we live holistically in such a way that we feel empowered to do that? Or is living holistically itself empowering enough to do that? Any thoughts on that, Dr. Wooten?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. I think that's a life's worth of practice. I see it as a practice, as a spiritual practice.
Okay.
I see some of what you are asking is, how I interpret it is, how can I repair some of the ruptures in relationship that I've experienced?
Yes.
And I would say from a body-centered place, it would start by tuning in to sensation of in my body, what are the feelings, and again, just social engagement. It's checking out and then tuning in to assess, am I truly in danger or not? Which is kind of a central nervous system precedent at the moment, but
And that's quite a question to ask, because we often fear that we're in danger, but maybe we're not.
well, the danger, you're not going to accept me.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
Right. You might not think I'm good enough or smart enough, or I may not think I'm good enough or smart enough.
But how can we welcome and accept other people if we're involved in that cycle of, am I going to be rejected? I mean, it would seem to leave no room to welcome and accept others.
Well, I think that's what we're kind of talking about, is if we can access the spaciousness within us versus the constriction.
Oh, okay.
By conscious breathing, a conscious breath, a conscious touch.
Yeah.
Letting my weight down, sensing my feet. Because if I go sensory, I'm going to be current. I'm going to be right here and now. And then I'm going to be able to lean into whatever comes a little easier than being off in some illusion or fantasy of what might happen, which is going to escalate any experience I'm having.
Yeah, those techniques of grounding are so more useful than we think them to be. The being aware of, where your body is in space
And
is so useful.
And you'd be so surprised when I get to the end of a manipulation treatment and somebody gets up from the table, I always tell them go slowly and those sorts of things, because you've been laying down and your heart's been going slow, so you might get a little dizzy when you raise up. And so they go slow and they rise up from the table, but they still feel off, or there's still this one little twinge, or there's still this, I still feel a little dizzy, or I still feel a little headache, or blah, blah.
Yeah.
If I'll get them to stand up and get down on my knees and physically ground them to the ground with their feet and their legs, and make sure that their feet are accurately touching the ground and the muscles in their legs and their calves are actually sensing the ground, all of that just fades away.
That's good.
And that's, the end of treatment. But, sometimes it takes just grounding someone's foot. Sometimes it takes grounding all the way up to the knee or the hip or the shoulders or whatever. But that's a practice that you can do to yourself each day as you're getting up or as you're going to sleep. My usual thing is, what prompts me to do it is if I'm having trouble falling asleep, I'll start at my toes and think about each one of my toes and think about the muscle and bones in each one of my toes and work my way up into my feet and ankles and all the way up, and make sure, okay, where am I holding tension?
Yeah.
What is that tension really? If I'm holding it in my stomach or in, my intestines or whatever, I'll ask myself, okay, what happened today that made me feel this way? When did I start grasping a hold or constricting around that part of my body and try to release what's going on around that?
There's an old hymn called Take My Life and Let It Be Consecrated. It's a very long title, but it was by a woman named Frances Ridley Havergal, and it's from a spiritual standpoint. It goes through, it says, take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. And then she says, take my head, take my hands, let them serve. There's a verse for each. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my lips and let them speak, what is worthy. And that's a highly spiritualized standpoint or perspective, but there is some connection with being aware of what our body's actions are in the world, I guess. This has been chill-inducing and riveting for me, and I thank you so much for being a part of this. Is there a book or two that you would recommend for further reading on these kind of topics?
I would say I'm a big fan of a little paperback called Focusing by Eugene Gendlin. It's a little paperback. Costs you a penny on Amazon, $3.99 to get it shipped to you.
And that last name is spelled
Gendlin.
Gendlin.
Gendlin. I'm also a fan of Hakomi Therapy, which they have a Hakomi International website.
That's Hakomi.
Right.
Okay.
And they have lots of articles and resources that will just, if you're interested in body and body-oriented practice, they've got tons of free literature right there.
Perfect. Anything come to mind for you, Blaise? This is an unexpected curveball. Sorry, I didn't ask anything before. A website or a book or anything?
The book that I've been reading currently is The Body Keeps the Score by Vander Kolk, but that's a very good one. And it
is about how, I just ordered it, by the way, yesterday, and it is about how the body holds trauma.
Yes.
Okay.
And how the effects that trauma can have on the body.
Okay. Very good.
But then I think also a wonderful resource is going to your local counselor and to your local physician. I think those are wonderful resources for you to use when you're feeling these things. And so there you go.
Oh, my word. Brought to you by the Coalition of Osteopaths and Body-Centered Psychotherapists. Okay, well, thank you. Anything else, Megan?
No, thank you so much for being willing to do this. I think this conversation is really important right now, in the times that we're in, but also really in this last question of how can we bring this holistic healing and this mindfulness together with others is really the goal and the vision that we want for this single adults group, is to be able to come together and to encourage each other to do those things that we've talked about and to pursue healing together. And so I think this is a really helpful conversation to do that.
Thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for tuning in. Hop on Zoom for a Q&A right now.